It's so windy.
Windy.
Yeah, I'm surprised you can't hear it. Feels like it's right in my ears. Okay.
Do you
We're
want me to
recording.
intro?
No, it's okay. I can intro.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Makena.
I'm Mallory.
And I'm Lara.
And last week we kind of had a random catch-up pod. We talked about our DC trip, all of that good stuff. And then we hinted to the fact that this week we were going to have a bigger episode diving into our theme this month, which is all about diagnoses. That's how you say it correctly, right? Cool. And so today we're just kind of going to have a conversation about our relationship with our, I guess, mental health and physical health and all things health. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wellness. And I don't know, kind of just give some perspectives, get a little bit vulnerable with things that we have gone through in the past or maybe currently are going through. And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully this serves as kind of like a reminder. I mean, I don't feel like we ever purposely try and like sugarcoat anything that we're going through, but I do think that sometimes things can just come across inherently as like, oh, this person is like this or
More
has this sort
casual.
of like, yeah. And so I feel like it's good to have kind of a little bit more raw conversations about like, yeah, this is something that I've gone through in the past. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we had been talking yesterday too, which actually I had not even thought about, but we were talking about how sometimes like physical health diagnoses can have mental health implications, which is
Oh, yeah.
honestly something going into this month that I hadn't even considered. And after we got off the pod, I was just thinking about how so many of like the diagnoses that I've gotten around like my reflux disease or my blood disorder or my migraines, like very much had mental health implications for me. Not necessarily like, I guess the diagnosis itself, but like learning what was the reality of like what I had sometimes impacts you as well. So while I think primarily we'll talk about like mental health stuff, I think it's also, I would love to highlight to some degree the fact that physical health can have the same kind of long-term implications for your health too.
Totally.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like for me, it's going to be talking about more about those, Mal, like the physical stuff that has, and I don't know, like I'm kind of in between, like I had a therapist that didn't work out. So I'm kind of like in this weird in between part of my mental health stuff, but like the physical stuff, I do have access to those diagnoses, and it definitely like feels like I need that pillar of support for my mental health just to talk about those, but not having it is tough.
Do you maybe want to start with that?
Yeah, sure.
I feel like that might be.
Can I just, before we start like fully, I just feel like it's important to kind of give a disclaimer that I do feel like sensitive topics will be brought up in this. And I don't think that maybe we can do something in the description of the podcast, but just kind of if it's not helpful for someone to listen or for you to listen to people talking about their diagnosis or physical or mental health kind of challenges and experiences, then just like skip this episode.
Yeah, go to last week's.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like so first of all, like kind of talk about like the mental stuff. Like I think that these past, I don't know, I can't even put a number to it. Just like the past few months have been kind of hard for me, and I was seeing a therapist, but it wasn't a match. So I am kind of aware that I need to do the whole rigmarole of getting a new therapist, but I'm sure a lot of people can listen to this and relate to like that is it's a barrier. So but I really I know that it needs to happen, and I especially kind of a moment happened to me last week where I was thinking to myself, Lara, this really does need to happen, and this is a clear indication that this needs to happen, is that I was in a training for work, and we were talking about mental health. We were talking about therapy. We were we were talking to some mental health professionals, and just having them in the room saying, we are here to support you, to talk to you, I found myself like tearing up. And that was I was kind of like, oh yeah, okay. So that would be a pretty good indication that you need to talk to one of these people. And so I have some emails that I need to send out ASAP. But
we'll check in about that on the next episode to see if you've done it.
You should check in with me. Keep me on track. I think that the physical stuff, the biggest physical diagnosis that has affected my life, I think, is the vein problem, venous insufficiency that I was diagnosed with when I was at the Coast Guard Academy. Obviously really, really changed the direction of my life because I could no longer go to school there. And, you know, the rest is history. We have had lots of episodes about me talking about that. But I think when that initially happened, it was in a place where mental health was especially not really cared for. So that felt even more intense in the way that I was being told my life was going to go in a completely different direction because of this new physical problem that I had no idea that I had or even existed. And I then had to spend a few weeks, because getting out of the military takes like weeks to do. It's so much paperwork, it's exit interviews, it's whatever. So I was staying there for weeks after getting that diagnosis and knowing that I had to leave. I had been able to talk to my parents very few, like not much at all. And I no longer had the support of my friends that I had made because I had to leave my company. So I think that was really hard because it was a physical diagnosis with pretty explicit disregard for the mental health repercussions of that physical diagnosis. And
a lot of implications. It wasn't just a diagnosis where you're like, oh, okay, like just continuing on with my life. Like there was like actual implications for your life.
Yes. Yeah. Huge implications. And even coming back home and no longer having a physical symptom was extra mind fuckery, because I got a physical diagnosis for a physical symptom, you know, that I had at Coast Guard. And then when I no longer had that, but I still had the physical diagnosis and I still had to live with the repercussions, and I had my family, but I didn't really have friends at home. I didn't have, you know, access to a mental health professional. It was a really, really low point. And I've, you know, talked about that before, but it was not a good year of my life. And yeah, it's something that I'm really grateful for. It happened in retrospect because it led me to the life I have now and the people that I have met now. But it's still following me in that I am, you know, considering my future more and more now and thinking about what next steps are out there for me in terms of work. And I really love weird jobs that aren't working in an office cubicle. And some of the jobs that I've been looking at for my future involve a physical component where I would have to go to a doctor or multiple doctors and basically get a physical clearance. And it sucks to have to tell them, like, yeah, I have this past diagnosis. Did it hold any water? Not really.
Yeah.
But could it still take opportunities away from me? Absolutely. Which that is so stupid. And I hate that. So, you know, I think after being there were multiple occasions where the Department of Defense said that that physical diagnosis that I had would disqualify me from anything for the rest of my life. So I think that that's, even though it's like so much time has passed and there's been no physical indication that this venous insufficiency is still something I struggle with, it's still something that follows me. So that is probably my biggest physical thing. But I think just any physical, like skin problems that you have that you're seeking like help with, a physical injury, like, you know, a broken ankle or a dog bite. These are all things that really, really, really affect every part of you.
Well,
And
you're back during rowing.
yeah, that was good
Mhm.
because I did have a therapist at that point. But yeah, just, well, oh my God, wow, kind of forgot about that, you guys.
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that back, but I feel like for you, that was so hard.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was the worst. I basically was on the rowing team at Michigan, and my last year, I was just always in and out of being able to do things because of my back. And that injury in collegiate sports also carries with it kind of like well, you could tough it out. Like,
Yeah.
you could do the workout, Lara, but you're choosing not to. And it was like, no, I can't even bend over. That's how bad it is. So that was tough, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like all of that is just, yeah, I feel like especially for you as such a serious athlete, the back stuff was so tough because it's not like you didn't want to do it. It's like more than anything you wanted to be a part of that, but you had to respect the fact that there was limitations, and that for sure had mental health implications, but also I feel like there was the implications of your team and the teammates and those dynamics. And yeah, I mean, it's different, when a runner twists their ankle and can't run in a race, like obviously that's terrible and awful, but there's also like in team sports, there's also like the team implications of getting an injury too.
Yeah. Definitely all that back stuff really, because that was the first time I was kind of in my whole life of physical, challenges that I seek out besides the vein stuff at Coast Guard. That was kind of the first time I felt benched by my body, and it was a
Yeah.
big teaching moment for me.
Yeah. Well, and like, my dad's not here, but I think my dad is feeling similarly right now with his broken femur, where his body's been able to do everything more or less that he's asked it to do his whole life. And I feel like for you and your relationship to your body, you're like, well, it pretty much does any challenge that I ask it to do. It can like fight through anything. And then you have a serious physical limitation, like my dad breaking his femur, or you like having a serious back injury. And then you're like, well, actually, there are limitations on what my body can do. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
Really, really hard.
Oh, yeah. And even just watching my dad get older, he's the same way, that his body has been there for them for his whole life, and now there's just this external factor that is putting a few wrenches in the roadway. And it's I think it's good for me to see, because it's something that I will also deal with later in life, not just by age but by other factors. And yeah, it definitely has a big mental effect.
Yeah. And it challenges like the self-image that you have of yourself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Also, both of those things happened in times, like you said, that were so emotionally charged and were just so all encompassing of your life, like Coast Guard summer and also rowing and being in college full time studying. Like, those are two environments that there's not space to like rest and recoup and recover and maybe keep going. Like, you're in the fire. And so I think that's an important component as well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like we're always in the fire.
I know. But I mean, arguably those are two
Big ones, yeah.
big external kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And it so matters who is around you to support you.
Mhm.
Like after the Coast Guard thing, I didn't have any friends at home. I had my parents, which they were great, but I was also doing a job that I really didn't like. And I had
Yeah.
a really long commute on the freeway, which is scientifically proven horrible for your mental health. So it was a dark time.
Yeah, that was not fun.
Mm-mm.
It really, as we like are getting older, I spend a lot more time thinking about chronic pain and
Mm.
about how some people just have really debilitating chronic pain and the world just brushes over them and refuses to acknowledge that their pain is valid. Because even like when I have minor injuries or like Lara with your dog bite or whatever it might be, how much that affects your day-to-day life, like,
Oh
or
yeah.
Mal's migraines or whatever it is, like chronic pain is so scary. And you just feel like, not to be like a cliched older person now getting older, but like being grateful for your body functioning kind of at a baseline rate is, I don't know, underrated, I guess.
For sure.
So underrated. Yeah. I feel like an old person about half of the time. So whenever my dad's like, wow, this femur break, like really like the first time I've really, had a challenge with my body. And I'm like, oh, I get stomach aches every day. And I get, maybe 4 to 5 like headaches a week and 1 migraine a
Yeah,
week. And,
that's so much.
yeah, I'm like, oh, yeah, my body and I were teammates, but my body hates me. So clearly we're not a great partnership.
Opposite sides. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm joking, body. You are my partner, but you're being kind of a bitch right now.
That's fair.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to do yours? Do you want me to do mine? What are you feeling?
You can do yours. Well,
Okay.
Lara, first, did you kind of talk about everything you wanted to chat about?
Yeah. If something else comes up, I'll interrupt you mid sentence.
Of
Yeah,
course,
please.
yes.
Please
Yeah.
mid-sentence. Okay. Well, I feel like we've talked about a lot of this on the pod, but I feel like when I was younger, like little, I had a lot of anxiety as a little kid, to the point where I had so much separation anxiety from my parents that I would make them like sit in the car outside of my friend's house if I was over at a friend's, or I'd make them like sit and watch my softball practice. And if they like went to the bathroom, I would start crying. And
Oh, Mal.
it was really bad. And I think I've said this in the pod, but I remember finding the how to deal with a child with anxiety on my mom's like next to her bed. And I remember being like, I don't have anxiety. Like, this is a normal like human reaction to your parents going away.
Yeah.
Which
What
is,
child is she talking about?
yeah, come on. And so, yeah, I never thought that I had anxiety. Like that was never a thing that I really had.
Mal,
Yeah.
sorry, can I just ask a question? And I mean this
No.
in like the least judgmental way possible, because I
That's
think it's
always a great way to lead off a question. So good.
I know, but it's really important to me that I don't feel like
Yeah.
this is like a bad thing to say, but I'm just
Yeah.
generally curious. Do you, if you could kind of like take a zoom out of your life and look down, do you think that this anxiety actually was this anxiety around, do you remember when your parents were together, or did it mostly happen when your parents had separated?
I mean, they separated when I was 2, so I feel like I don't really remember when they were together. I feel like we'd have to ask them to
Yeah.
get a full analysis. Yeah, I don't know. I can't fully answer that question. I don't know.
I was just wondering.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And, if I did some inner child work, maybe we can dig into that a little bit.
Wait, Lara, did
Yeah.
you have a comment?
I just had a comment that I think it's really cool that you as a child with anxiety, you didn't think that anything was wrong with you.
No.
Like, I think that is a very cool thing that your parents did, that it wasn't kind of something put on you, that you felt like you were plagued
A
with
label.
something, that you were strange or had a problem or anything, that you just thought like, oh, I'm just a normal kid who loves my parents.
Mhm.
What's wrong with that?
Well, and as I've gotten older, I realized that like crying in bed before I go to sleep every night because I'm worried my parents are going to die is not normal. So, but at the time, especially as an only child, like I think I didn't
Mhm.
have anything to compare my experience to.
Mhm.
Like all I had was my
Yeah.
own experience. And so, me crawling into my dad's room at night to sleep on the ground, like that felt like a normal reaction to like fearing your parents' death. So I think now I understand that my preoccupation with them dying was probably not normal for the age that I was at, and that there was probably some other layers in there. Um, so yeah, that's just some background, I guess, on my childhood. I think the anxiety has always been there. I just think I heard this phrase of like functional anxiety the other day, and like I think most people to like have phases in their life where their anxiety feels functional, and then other phases where it feels like less functional. But I, yeah, I don't know. I think the next time that I really experienced it in a way that I like remember it being tangible was when I was having all of my like regurgitation of my food. Not to get too graphic, but I would eat and then it would literally just like come back up and I'd rechew it and swallow my food again. And it was terrible. Like after every meal, I would just feel awful. And I remember and then at the same time, I was having a lot of heart palpitations, like a lot of like thought I had a heart problem. And I remember telling my boss at work about my symptoms. And I remember him saying, like, not to assume anything, but like, that sounds a lot like anxiety. And I was like, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, right. Okay. Like, I remember being like, no, this is just like a physical symptom. Cause I think my self image of myself was very much not a person with mental health problems. Like, I don't think I ever perceived myself to be like that. And even, we can talk about like the eating and moving stuff like too, but I very much thought that my somewhat restrictive eating and my like exercising for hours every day, like that was normal. That was like a normal thing that people did. I was just super disciplined and other people weren't. And so I think when my boss brought that up, it my like initial reaction was really defensive. I felt really defensive and I was almost like a little hurt that he said that to me. And it made me worry that people viewed me as anxious. And maybe that was something he had thought about me for a while and just hadn't said it. But then there was a little part of me that was like, right, maybe I should consider that. But it was like a part I did not want to admit at the time at all. And I don't even really remember the first time. I think the reality when I got all of the stomach tests and nothing came back, really, I was sort of like, well, I think I have to start considering that it may be something that is not necessarily physical and that there's something mental that is causing the physical challenges. And honestly, I feel like my primary care doctor was the first one who like fully brought it up to me. I don't think I talked about it in therapy that much, like admitting that anxiety was something that I had. I like the timeline, it feels really confusing in my head. But long story short, I think I finally admitted that anxiety was probably something that I was experiencing. And then I remember bringing it up to my therapist and her being like, yeah, duh. Like we've known this whole time. Like, she was sort of like, I guess I thought you kind of knew that that was something that you were experiencing. And I was like, oh, okay, good. But I feel like it was really hard for me to make the jump from accepting that physical symptoms I was having could be from mental things. That was like so hard because it's like the whole control is an illusion thing. You like, I can control my body. And so there's clearly, a virus or a parasite in my body causing this. There's no way it could be my own like mental health that is causing the physical symptoms. So,
Well, and what's crazy, Mal,
yeah,
is that so much of this happened in the pandemic.
most
Like
of it, yeah.
almost everything. Yeah. So I would be so curious, and I feel like this is so many people's experience. Like if life kept going at the pace that it was going without COVID, like what would our lives look like, or what would your life look like? And would those changes have been made, or would you have chosen to go on medicine or do any of that stuff,
No, but I mean, think about, so I started a therapist during the pandemic. I started my
Mhm.
medication. I realized that I like really struggled with like exercising too
Mhm.
much and
Well,
being
think
like,
about that. Our Thailand conversation, the whole Thailand trip,
yeah,
and then it was COVID right away. Like that
yeah,
happened so fast.
yeah. Yeah. So I don't think I would have. I mean, I bet there would have been a point in my life where it would have hit me like a wrecking ball. But I think we've talked
Mhm.
about this, Makena, where it's like your body eventually will give you the
Yeah.
consequences it needs to give you to wake you up to
Yeah.
something. And I think the regurgitation was like the first stage of that. And I think it only would have gotten worse and worse and
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
So
There's some saying where I forget the exact phrase, but it's basically like the longer you, like if you ignore your body signs, then it's like such a good phrase, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically like the longer you avoid it, like you are no longer going to be treating signs, you'll be treating sickness.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's what it felt
So,
like.
yeah.
That's for sure
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
felt like.
Yeah. I mean, it was severely impacting your life.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, it's still hard too, because I mean, I can't say today, like, I don't think my anxiety will ever be fully managed. Like, I don't think you can ever fully, like, 100% manage a mental health challenge. I think you can take the edge off and you can be able to like manage it within, your day-to-day life. But I still fear my parents' death every single day. I still fear my own death. I still have symptoms of anxiety, I'm sure. And there's certain things that trigger it more than others. So anyway, but I guess the reason that I think that anxiety is interesting is more just the cognitive dissonance I had around the diagnosis of anxiety and not feeling like I could be a person who had a diagnosable like disorder of some type. And I think there's so much stigma around it, and I certainly felt that. And now I
I
feel
wonder
like,
too, though,
yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
as a kid internalized like, oh, I saw that book on my mom's nightstand about like how to,
Mm.
parent a kid who has anxiety. And it almost like created this narrative in your head of like, I don't know, the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And
But
so then
also,
by the time it came time to accept that, it was like, what?
but
I
it
don't
was
know.
also like, my college self-image of myself was this like badass, successful bitch who like is going to become president, And I think at
Yeah.
that time, that and then a person with anxiety could not have been the same thing. Whereas now
Yeah.
I'm like, I can be that and have anxiety. Like they're not two different things, but what I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. And it took me a long time to be ready to admit that like anxiety to me was something that I was living with day to day, and it was impacting my life, but it didn't take away from my success or like who I was as a person.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I
I
mean,
just
yeah, go ahead.
I feel like you have done such a good job at being a person with a few features that then were called out almost, like
Yeah.
the intuitive eating newsletter you just sent out, or the, you know, a lot of exercise or a mental health diagnosis. Like I feel like there were parts of your belief system that were in the past a certain way, and you've done a really good job at being like, oh, okay, like time to change.
Yeah.
It's gonna hurt a little bit to try and change this view I have of myself, but I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
No, but
But
I
like,
also think,
yeah, go ahead.
Mal, to add on to Lara's comment, I think you've made those changes, but then you've also become champions for the
Mm-hmm.
opposite of like the healthier mindset, which I think that is like the next step, I think, is then showing other people that it's actually okay to one, make a change, have the ability to kind of like be humble enough to sit with those changes, and then telling the world like, and I'm proud of those changes.
Yeah. And I guess what I want people who are listening to this to remember is my response to the eating, the exercise, and the anxiety was all defensiveness. My initial reaction, Makena can tell you firsthand that like defensiveness was the first thing that came. Like, it wasn't like I was like, oh yeah, so receptive, please. Absolutely.
Yeah, so
true.
grateful for this new perspective.
Yeah. So I don't want this to sound like it was some like easy arc of like someone told me I had anxiety and I was like, wow, yes, thank you for telling me. Absolutely. Like, it was like, no, fuck you. That really hurt my feelings that you said that to me. So, you know, people listening to this, I think it's important that like, for me, my experience with getting diagnosed with anxiety was not like, you know, me being grateful in the moment or anything. I think it's really normal to feel defensive at first and really struggle with the stigma of like what it means to have whatever, you know, diagnosis you have. And I mean, I feel like I had the same reaction with medication too, is when my doctor was like, you know, you might want to try medication. It might help. And then being like, well, I'm a person with anxiety. Am I really a person who's going to take medication too? That's like a whole nother level. And that was, again, a defensiveness of, is the self-image that I have of myself being a person who takes anxiety medication? Like, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that. And as you said, I feel like now I'm an evangelist for it, where I'm like, really, I think we need to break down the stigma, but it's important to remember that very rarely is your first reaction going to be, yes, I'm all in on this, because there is so much socialization around like our perceptions of people with mental health challenges and people who have to take medication. And so this is all just me saying, go ahead.
There's also a lot of environments with work or personal environments where it is not safe to seek help, to go to therapy, or you are actively punished in your job, even though they legally can't do that. Like, it still happens, right? Like,
totally,
those sorts of things.
Military.
Yeah. The military.
Yeah.
Or like your family's not supportive. Like,
right.
I mean, I felt really lucky that my family is, and I feel like they were sort of like, we've been new, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly parents and family members who aren't ready to like support you in that. So,
or who might think that that reflects on them, that whatever decisions you make reflect on them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I feel really lucky that I had, you know, you guys, but also my family and Ryan, and everyone was super supportive, even when I was still working through what it meant for me to experience that. So yeah, I feel like, any questions, things I missed? I feel like you were both very intimate in that time with me. So I feel like you know it as well as I do in a lot of ways.
No, I think I'm hearing both of you guys kind of recap the past few years. I think I'm just proud of both of you for, I don't know, being really vulnerable, and feel like every time that there's been something that you had to meet face on, you did it. And I think it's easier to not do that. And so I think watching you guys have that journey has been really special.
Yeah. Thank you, Makena. I agree. And
you're welcome, Lara.
Makena, I appreciate that.
I know, it's like my biggest pet peeve when people do that.
Say your name.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll call you honey from now on.
No, that's worse.
Mal, I think that it's really interesting to think back to when we first met at camp during my first summer, because it was a time period in both of our lives where some of our old thinking was kind of
heightened,
running rampant. Like, and I think it's just cool that even at that point, I was, you know, determined to make you my best friend. And now I'm just even more obsessed with you, because those old things that we used to think, or like I don't know, just the way that we used to act, it's great to grow. Because some of those things were not good.
But it's so fun that I feel like we grew together. I mean, I feel like it's totally possible that we could have hit those phases at different times and just like totally grown apart because we weren't able to bond over that. So I
Mhm.
feel really grateful that I feel like our growth happened at similar times to where we can like talk through it now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Ken,
Ken
you're
Ken?
up.
Okay.
Bada bada.
I've been trying to think about how you guys both kind of, I feel like, covered things in a very timeline way. So maybe I'll just do that.
That's all I
But
could think of in my head is like chronological.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. You guys will have to fill in blanks if I leave something out. But I would say the majority of like my life, I've had really extreme anxiety and a lot of other issues that I don't necessarily think like stemmed from just me. There was a lot of external factors in my childhood that impacted my mental health. So there was like a lot of layers there. But I would say the biggest turning point in my adult life was when my grandma died. And this was like the same time that Lara was going through Coast Guard stuff. And I would say for me, my reaction to that, like the death of someone I love very much and I was very close to, resulted in more anxiety, a lot of anger and irritability, and I would say a depressive episode. And in those states, I did not have a ton of support in terms of how to process and grieve. And I remember a primary care doctor telling me, like, I think you're just like a little bit sad. And I'm like, no, I'm not a little bit sad. I'm like really struggling. And that was, I think, a hard kind of thing to hear when you're hurting so much. And my family isn't super open about talking about death. So I felt very sometimes alone in the processing of that. And shortly after then, I moved to Vegas for a little while and I started
Wait,
seeing
sorry, can
my,
I
yeah,
interrupt really fast?
yeah.
I could break this table at the idea of a doctor after, like, literally after you have lost a parental figure in your life.
Mhm.
Like, talk about like Mal fearing the death of her parents. That was a parental figure in your life.
Yeah.
Not an expected death. That was an
Mm-mm.
unexpected death.
Mhm.
To be like, oh, you're probably just like a little bit sad. You're probably a little
Yeah.
cranky.
And this is a
No,
person who
are you
knew my
kidding?
family, who had grown up with me, who was very well aware of the situation. Like it was so negligent to like
Oh
say
my
something like that.
God.
Like thinking back to that time, I'm like so grateful that I didn't do anything to hurt myself because
Me
I was
too.
like I was floundering so much. My friends didn't know how to handle it because I didn't know how to handle it. And it often resulted in like a lot of tension with me between other people. And yeah, it was just not so great. But yeah, then I don't know, a little while later, I got my first therapist, and this was very like talk therapy. Like it helped me identify a lot of baseline things about my life, like having anxiety and working through, talking through problems. But I mean, I remember as a kid, like I would never really get sick as a kid, but anytime I was sick, my mom would always be like, she always knew that I wasn't actually sick. I was like, I just had a lot of anxiety. Like I just had too many emotions and she would let me stay home or whatever. And like, cause I really felt physically ill, but
Mhm.
like she knew often that it was not, an actual sickness. So yeah. Let's see. I did the therapy thing for a while and I'm trying to remember the next steps because eventually I made my way back to California and I was in a really high stress job. I had already done the Camino. The Camino was like a big game changer, I think, for just having some time and space to like process some big like losses in my life that I had around, because that was like my grandma, a breakup, like all around that same time frame. And then I immediately kind of got into this really high stress job after, was that after Thailand, Mel? No, that was before.
Yeah,
Thailand
definitely
was after.
before.
Yeah. So after the Camino, before Thailand, I was in a high stress job. And then in that time, I found the therapist that I have now, who's literally an angel sent on this earth to make specifically for me. Sometimes I feel like
custom made.
And she's been my therapist for lots of years now, which I'm very grateful for. And she has a much, I think, more holistic view of therapy, a lot of like somatic therapy, inner child stuff, that sort of thing. So I want to caveat this though, that my therapist is the best thing in my life and also something I pay a lot of money for. So this is like a huge expense in my life that I am unwilling to give up no matter what, because she truly has like kept me alive and processed some of like the biggest traumas with me. So I am very lucky and grateful that I can make that happen financially. But yeah, let's see. What am I missing, guys? Oh, and also in that whole time frame around when I found my new therapist was when I started hearing from dead people. And so then that was like a whole nother level of anxiety. And it's still something that I navigate.
Still gets me.
Yeah. Yeah. Still gets me sometimes. And just like the overwhelming feeling that not everything about a person, but just a lot of details about a person in whatever environment you walk through. I feel like I've gotten so much better at kind of turning it off and not being overwhelmed by it, but it never goes away. So even though my awareness has shifted with it, it is always very present. It's kind of like I feel like sometimes there's like a pool waiting for me, and it's like I see the pool, I'm around the pool. It's just whether or not I want to get in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of how I look at it. Yeah. And then in Colorado, I think I had kind of just been chugging along, and I had much more severe mental health struggles than I was expecting to have. And I think sometimes in the process of like uncovering trauma and healing trauma and working through stuff, we obviously know it's not linear, but some pretty serious like stuff came up. I forgot to mention that in like 2019, I had panic attacks almost every single day. Like I'm gonna puke panic attacks. Every time I would leave my house to go to work, I had a panic attack, which is why I eventually left my job. And then when I got to Colorado, those had pretty much gone away, but I had a lot of financial stress because of that move. And I think once we moved into the house that we currently are, I think I finally felt safe to kind of start processing a lot of that. And so it did lead to some less frequent but bigger panic attacks, I will say. And also some like self-harm stuff and thoughts around self-harm and a light action around self-harm. So that was a hard thing, because similar to kind of what Mal was saying is like, I don't view myself as someone with anxiety. Like for me, I was like, I don't view myself as someone who hurts myself. Like that is incomprehensible to me. And I think if you asked me in like a regulated state, I would be like, I would never do something like that. But yeah, it got kind of scary for a while. I think I shied away from how intense those feelings were for, I would say like 4 months. It was really hard. It was like an urge that I fought off like almost every single day. And I feel like I really protected like my environment, and it wouldn't buy things that I could see as like something that I could harm myself with. So that was like not so great. Also because I have this like complex in my head of being like the responsible one or the person who has something it all together, then having like to admit that I was unraveling in a way like that was really hard. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions so far before I move on?
Well, oh yeah, go ahead, Lara.
I was just gonna say, I just think it's like a really interesting theme that we're gonna keep bringing up probably in this whole month, is that there's an image in everyone's mind of, oh, well, I think that this is what a person with anxiety looks like, and I'm not that person. This is the person I think who has an eating disorder. I don't look like that person. I'm not that person. This is a person that self-harms themselves. I'm not at that level. I'm not that person. Like, but there's parts of all of us that are able to be that person if life demands that of us, or if it's, if you're in that much of an activated state, you can be any person at any version.
Yeah. Oh, Douglas. Yeah, I think to your point, Lara, like even with food and exercise, like I think that was a way that I utilized harming myself for a long time. And then once I kind of got over that hump and I was like feeding myself regularly and moving in a healthier way, it was like, where does that energy go? Like, what is next? Because it just didn't feel like, I don't know. I feel like I kind of switched focus. And it's kind of like fucks with your brain to be like, I am healing so deeply right now from so many things. And at the same time, I feel worse than I've ever felt. Like, and it comes in waves and like, it's not always present. And I just always remind myself that it's temporary. And I always remind myself, especially if my thoughts got darker, like wanting to like really harm myself, like that was a temporary feeling. And I, no matter what, like want to be here and I want to be alive and I love life. And that is like not something that I don't know, but it's like really shameful to have thoughts like that or to be like feeling like you're so alone that like you do have thoughts like that. Even if there's like people in your corner, you know?
Yeah.
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 Totally. And I think that's part of the stigma is like it can feel so isolating and so lonely. And so it's easy to not talk about it or not tell people, which can kind of just continue the cycle of feeling really lonely in it,
Yeah.
which I think is the hard part. I was going to ask kind of because I see a lot of similarities between like our anxiety and how it manifested with like food and exercise. And I feel like for me, similar to what you're saying, like it was control, like it was all me trying to control aspects of my life. But I feel like maybe I don't know a lot about when do you feel like, or when did your diagnosis around your eating disorder actually happen versus like when did you see those behaviors like start to come to life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say it was worse. Like the worst time eating disorder wise was, I would say probably like senior year of high school, junior, senior year of high school. Keep going back actually. Since I remember, I've had controlling thoughts about food. So my whole childhood. But it got really bad in terms of taking bigger action, mostly because I had more control when I was in my later teens. And then the worst was probably 2017, 2018. Those were really, really horrible years. And at one point, it got very unhealthy. And then I feel like I was aware of it by 2018 and 2019. And I don't think significant shifts happened until 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
Is kind of like the timeline.
To your point, Makena, though, it's like, I think this is a really important point is like, you are doing so much growth. Like we all are in a lot of ways. And I feel like I'm growing a lot. I'm still in the worst body image phase of my like whole life. Like just because we are growing and I feel like, you know, I know what to say to myself. I know how to manage things generally. Like I still look in the mirror and like feel like shit a lot of the time, like most of the time. And I still like, I just think it's important to like remember the duality is like growth is not necessarily always uphill. And even if there's growth in one area, it's not always growth in all of the areas. And you know, our default can still be control. Like my default is still control, especially in stressful times. And that looks different for everyone. And I think sometimes it's easy to come up with a narrative in my head, like, well, I'm on medication. I have a therapist. Things should only be getting better. And that's not always the case.
Yeah. I feel like the way that I've started to look at it to avoid the trap of feeling like I need to be winning at healing or I need to be like, you know, doing the absolute best is I kind of look at it as the more I spend time being curious about these things and acknowledging trauma and bringing things to the surface that are painful, I am allowing myself to get to know myself on a deeper level. And that is the only relationship that matters to me, not necessarily if a symptom comes back or, I mean, just a few months ago, I had another bout of really difficult stuff around food and like having to force myself to eat. And I could have easily shamed myself for that cycle coming back because I had quote unquote healed it already. But instead I was like, okay, this is information that my body is giving me, that something feels out of control or something feels like this behavior needs to come back up. The behavior is not a reflection on who I am as a person, but my work is to just be as compassionate with myself as possible, treat my body and my mind and my spirit with respect, and to get to know myself more.
I love the like thought of it as information, because I think it takes a lot of the like negative stigmatizing emotions out of it, which I think is so important. Because I felt similarly like in the first semester of my new job, when I felt like all of the anxiety symptoms came back, heart palpitations, regurgitation, stomach aches. Like I don't think I've ever been so anxious as I was the first like August through November of last year. And I feel like it was easy for me to default to like, I thought I had handled this, but I think the perspective of, no, this is information that I'm not in a safe space at work. Like this is information that like, I don't feel supported and I'm not getting my needs met. What is like a very good perspective shift, but I think it can be really hard in the moment to like be objective, even if like in therapy, I can be like, yes, this is definitely information that is telling me I need to change the situation that I'm in.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I do want to say though, that around the same time that my mental health was like very much plummeting is when Douglas arrived. And that, Douglas has been the most challenging aspect of my life. And like in just terms of, it's a lot. Like owning an animal is a lot of work, and
he's a full baby. You had a child.
Yeah. But I think now that I'm out of the survival mode with him, because I've had him almost for a year, I recognize that, I'm gonna cry. But like, I recognize that honestly, I think he saved my life in like a lot of ways, and at least saved myself from hurting myself numerous times, because I was able to use him to regulate and all of that. So I think that the year anniversary is coming up. I've gotten very sentimental about him, and even though it's been really hard, I think it's been a really important thing to have in my life, and to give me kind of like a base layer of a like constant love and support. Laura, don't cry too. But
I'm not crying.
No one's crying. Yeah, because I think a lot of what my system needs is like nurturing and a healing of some like really old young wounds and sometimes just having something that loves you pretty much no matter what is helpful and a good thing. So I understand why therapy and service dogs exist. So
I can't remember who told you this, Makena, but someone, I don't remember who it was, but that Douglas's emotions reflect how you're feeling too.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like a very cool, like example of having an animal in your life who responds to your emotions and also has their own emotions that are bouncing off of what you're feeling, which is just a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, it's kind of like a video game sometimes in terms of like regulating both of our emotions. And the other day I was giving a reading and he was kind of worked up. And so I was like, I'm just going to like tune in and I hope he comes down. And as soon as I started deep breathing, his breathing was like really fast paced and then all of a sudden changed and he was matching my breaths. And it was just like a really interesting thing of like, we're all living things. Like we all respond to kind of this calm, I don't know, energy, and like me being calm helps him be calm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have a couple more things to talk about.
Yeah.
I would say the most recent mental health update for me is I've talked about it before, but like a conversation with my therapist on OCD. And we're pretty sure that I most likely don't fall under a true OCD diagnosis. Um, but I do have heavy OCD tendencies, and also been exploring this thing called pure O, which is more so the compulsive thoughts of OCD, not necessarily actions. Um, but yeah, I talked to my therapist last time. I feel like I've been putting off talking to her about it because I was like, I don't know, I'm like scared to get a diagnosis, I think, or hear her opinion like 100%. But finally I was like, listen, like I do think we need to talk about this and some of the symptoms, because I'm very good at hiding things from people. And I think that that's something that I need to be really aware of, because she was like, well, I don't know. Like she basically was like acknowledging some symptoms. And I was like, yeah, and I do this. And I've never told you that before because I'm good at pretending it doesn't exist. And she's like, okay, yeah, like those are big things. So that's a kind of a conversation I'm in the middle of right now. And the most recent anxiety thing that has happened is I've had an extreme terror of flying. And so that is a new kind of spotlight that my anxiety has decided to land on. So we will be navigating that one step at a time. And the last thing I want to say is like, I've been reading or listening to a lot of books about the brain and children. And like right now, I'm reading this book called The Whole Brain Child. And it's really like focused on parenting. But as someone who works with kids, it gives me like a lot of tools. So that's helpful to like have those tools. But I also feel like while I'm listening, I'm able to kind of reparent myself on some things and to understand why my brain might work a certain way. And so that has been just a cool thing to see, along with seeing the parents that I work for just being like the most attentive, caring parents. I think that has been really beneficial for my mental health. But the other day, I like was reading this book or listening to this book that Oprah and this guy, Dr. Perry, wrote. And it's all about the brain and trauma. And it's really interesting. I recommend it. And at the beginning of the book, they kind of were like, this might be difficult to hear some parts of this book. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, no way am I going to have difficulty hearing that. But a very specific event happened to me with like one of my family members that triggered something in me that was a really young part. And it happened to be at the time I was listening to a chapter on neglect in this book. And my body was like, so going through it with it, like it completely shut down. And then I had to just like retreat to my room, and I had kind of like an out of body experience where I saw myself, like I was like above myself, kind of seeing myself process things. And it was the first time that I was like extremely aware of actively processing and integrating trauma. And the process of integrating trauma is not really comfortable most of the time. Like it's just kind of a deep sense of discomfort, but it also feels good at the end to kind of like acknowledge and let it sit with you. And so that was only like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And so that was a really kind of big moment for me, that I was able to kind of be present for instead of disassociating and kind of allowing myself to feel or to choose other coping mechanisms that weren't as healthy. So yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that processing too has to do with nonverbal parts of ourselves, which I think is another interesting like layer.
Which also, bringing it all the way back to Mallory's, childhood when your parents divorced, like that's a nonverbal part of yourself that even if you don't remember it, it's still affected your mental health greatly.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That's my whole spiel, guys.
Thanks for being so vulnerable, Ken. That was so good.
Yeah, thank you, Ken.
Thank you guys for being vulnerable.
Douglas has single-handedly saved this household.
I know. He's the glue, and also what's the opposite of glue?
Yeah. He's the glue that keeps us together, and
yeah,
the part that drives us
yeah,
up the wall. But
yeah,
balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, guys. Important stuff. I'm really grateful to have you guys in my life.
I'm so
Me too.
grateful. I'm
Like, I
obsessed
don't
with
even
you
think
guys.
there's a word that describes how grateful I am.
There
It's
probably
actually
isn't a different
offensive that there isn't a
language.
word. You're right. Not silly English.
Yeah, I feel like every other language has like really nuanced words for emotions.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there is a different language that encompasses that word.
Encompasses
Yeah.
extreme love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
No, but I think I know a word.
What?
It's my friend from college, Anna Hera, who's been on the podcast, used this word all the time, but it's Fano, and it's spelled
Yeah.
with a WHANO, I think NOE, with a line over it. It basically just means like intense familial bond in Maori language, and I feel like that's what. But there are many words, I'm sure. If you could think of a word, tell us. But that's
love
just one I
that.
thought of.
I love that too.
Yeah. I feel like I want to leave everyone just with, I feel like sometimes when people talk about really heavy stuff, like maybe I just mentioned, or it feels kind of jarring, like I feel like I always worry about that person. So I just feel like I want to be like, I'm okay. I think you guys are okay. We have teams in place and support systems in place to help us navigate. And also, I think if you listen to this episode and you're like, that was way too much for my system right now, don't listen to the other ones. Like, you don't get a prize for making yourself uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I think there's always a time and place if you ever want to come back to listen to this. But yeah, I don't think that it's anything that we have to do.
Yeah, these episodes will stay here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Forever. They'll live on the internet forever.
Oh no.
Okay.
Yikes.
Any closing words, guys?
No. I'm excited for this month. Excited might be the wrong word, but I'm anticipatory.
Yeah.
Wow. The English language sucks. What is
Lara's still looking for a word.
Because I'm like, yeah, I don't think that I'm like bouncing off the walls excited, because I know that we're going to talk about some hard stuff, but I think that it's all going to be important and very timely for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And I will say this is my final note. When you see people on social media that look as though everything is perfectly in order, or they have this and you don't have that, or whatever it might be, it is very easy to miss so much of other people's lives. And I think that in this day and age, it's so easy to play the comparison game of like money, sex, relationship, mental health, body, whatever it is. And you just never know what someone is processing or going through or what their past is like. And I just feel like this one person I saw on Instagram, and I always was like, how does she do this? How does she run this business and have these kids and blah, blah, blah. She ended up like going into inpatient for a few months and had like a big like breakdown. And she was very open and honest about it when she came back. But it's just like served me as a reminder of like, we do not know. And comparing yourself to someone is just not worth it, honestly. Like, I don't know.
My Instagram is the fakest thing about me. If you
That's a
were to
hot take.
no, literally, that person, that life, not mine. I don't know who that is. It's not real.
That's a whole
If
other
you were to
episode
just
to unpack.
like, if you were to
Yeah.
just know me from my social media, that's not me. You know what I'm saying?
Same. Yeah.
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 Totally. Yeah. And people, I mean, not everyone deserves to see that all of the time. So yeah, you're right, Mal. This is another episode. We should move on.
Yeah.
We should move on. But yeah, be gentle with yourselves. Take time. If this was, a hard episode to listen to, maybe don't plug in for a minute, go for a walk, read a book, something to nourish yourself and your body and your mind.
Yeah.
We love you.
Love you guys.
You.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.